want to answer a question that you asked several weeks ago, but I have been struggling to actually find an answer to. And you asked, what was the population of Israel during that time? And the reason it's really difficult to have an answer to that question is because we're really just guessing, right? I mean, nobody was there and that is alive now, and so we just have a difficult time of putting that together. And so everything that we, all of the numbers have to be taken with a grain of salt. That being said, people have done some estimations on population. So, and the other side of it too is that it's really hard to estimate a particular location, even in a particular location in a larger region, during that time frame. So, having said that, here are a few population estimates, and they do vary somewhat wildly. So put that into mind. All right. So, in AD 1, the population estimate was about 3.5 million to 6 million people in the Levant. So that's going to be the Israel area, the greater part of the Israel area, including Syria and Lebanon and all of that. So that's the year after Christ's birth, or the year that we call Christ's birth, right? In 1000 BC, the numbers get even wilder. All right, so they're guessing that the world population at that time is between 50 and 115 million. All right. Yeah, so the whole world's population at that time, that's just you can see the difference is a 65 million difference in people. So that just gives you sort of just an idea of why it's so challenging to do this. All right, and then from 50 to 115 million in 1000 BC, they estimate that there's somewhere between 188 to 200 million people in the world in 1 AD. And so depending on your number there, that's between 150 million increase and just about 65 or 75 million in increase. So of course, you have to take into consideration death rates were a lot higher then. People, there was a lot greater infant mortality rate, and then people just didn't live as long also. So okay, so that's the other thing too. Most of these people lived in the same areas, and so the greatest population during this time frame is going to be Asia. But Asia is huge, right? And so it includes all of the islands and the greater part of Russia and India and all of that. And so so in the estimation of 200 million people in 1 AD, about 100 million of those people actually live in Asia. And so the larger population is there. But just to give you an idea of the sort of grander population of the Mediterranean, in 1000 BC, so this is the time frame we're working in, they estimate that there's about 10 million people living in the Mediterranean. So Europe, and the Italy, Greece, Asia Minor, which is Turkey, the Levant, Egypt, right? So you got about 10 million people living in that area. And then by 1 BC or 1 AD, you've got about 30 million people living in the same area. So,
the size of armies, sometimes those armies are pretty good size armies.
Is it with the age of the people? And so you didn't typically had males living past the age of 40 or 50 years old. And so generally speaking, most of your male population is going to be of service age, most of their entire life. They're going to be eligible to serve in the military, right? Now, their ability to serve in the military might be diminished, but generally speaking, your entire population of men are probably always going to be able to serve in the military. So mustering an army is not all that difficult. Plus, at the time of our story, up until I don't know, 600 or 700 BC or so, most places, with very few exceptions, don't have standing armies, and so they're very tribal based. And just like here we read in our text, you are, when you're going to go to war, you wait till the planting season's over and you gather everybody together and you go to war, right? And then you go back, make sure you go back before harvest, because you got to get back out there and bring the food in. And so And so that's typically how it works. So you don't always have a standing army. So gathering together these large armies isn't actually all that difficult. It's difficult to provision them and all of that, but everybody's in the same place, and most of your population is probably going to be of the age of service anyway. And so with an estimation of 30 million people so I'm going to give you a guess here. So with an estimation of 30 million people in the Mediterranean in 1 AD, and a high estimation of 6 million of those people living in the Levant area, the crossroads area, we could guess that there will probably be about 2 or 3 million people living in the Levant area sometime in the 1000 BC range. So, but again, take all that with a grain of salt, because nobody really knows for sure. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We'll just a real quick recap of what we talked about last time. We looked at Samuel as he becomes the judge of Israel. The narrative during that time gets really fast. So this is going to be chapters 7 and 8. So we really just get this sort of overarching text of what's going on with Samuel. So he comes he becomes the judge. This is really the first time that we get this information that Samuel is the judge of Israel. He's a prophet, the priest, and essentially the king. That's kind of what the judge does. He stands in the place of God and makes judgments. We also see this gathering of the Philistines after the people of Israel come together. They call on Samuel to help them, to deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. And then as soon as they all gather together, the Philistines come against them. And one of the reasons probably for that is that they were gathering in the central Benjamin Plateau, which is where all of the armies gather. And so the Philistines were probably just reacting to that. But because they came together and repented of their sin, the Lord was with them, and they defeated the Philistines, and they drove them out of the territory of Israel. And the text tells us that during the time that Samuel was judging the land, the Philistines never enter into to the land of Israel again during that time frame. Now, what the land of Israel looks like isn't quite what it's going to look like, or what the promised land was when we're talking about the division of land for judges, right? So what he's talking about is the property that they owned at that time. And you can see on this map what that is. This is what we talked about last time. The green area is the area that Israel essentially controls during that time frame. All right, and so then it just sort of picks up from there. We get this story about Samuel's sons, about how he tried to make them judges, or did make them judges, and they were corrupt just like Eli's sons. And the people of Israel weren't thrilled with the idea of Samuel's sons taking over. And so they came to Samuel and said, hey, we want you to make us a king. Samuel, of course, isn't thrilled about this idea because in part he sees it as a rejection of him and his leadership, but he also sees it as a rejection of God. And of course, God responds to Samuel at this time and says, no, let them have the king. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Okay, and so after that, we get into this Samuel's warnings about the king. Samuel then says, okay, fine, we're going to have a king. And then he goes in and talks about exactly what the king is going to do. And this is our big government text, right? Where he says, all right, so he's going to tax you. He's going to take your sons and put them in the army. He's going to turn your daughters into servants in his castle, right? He's going to take your land and he's going to give it to foreigners. He's going to do all of this stuff. And so after Samuel warns them that this is all going to take place, they said, yep, that sounds good to us. Let's do it, right? Okay. And it's interesting, and we talked about this last time, is that within 2 generations, the Israelites don't think this was such a good idea, right? After Solomon dies and his son says, oh yeah, you thought my dad was really bad about taxing you. You wait till I get my hands on your money, right? And so this is sort of the what happens. And Samuel has laid all of this out there for them. Okay. All right. And so that kind of brings us into to our text today, chapter 9. Chapter 8 ends with basically Samuel sending everybody off to their own town and saying, okay, we're going to sort this out. We're going to get you a king. All right. Okay, and so the story continues on. We're still in the 1049 BC range. Okay, and so we'll go ahead and read the text. Again, we're going to read a fairly large chunk of text here. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, son of Zahor, son of Bechorath, son of Apiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. From his shoulders upwards he was taller than any of the people. Now the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. So Kish said to Saul his son, take one of the young men with you, and rise, go and look for the donkeys. And he passed through the hill country of Ephraim, and passed through the land of Shalisha, but did not find them. And they passed through the land of Shalim, but they were not there. Then they passed through the land of Benjamin, and did not find them. When they came to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant, who was with him, come, let us go back, lest my father cease to care about the donkeys, and become anxious about us. But he said to him, behold, there is a man of God in this city, and he is a man who is held in honor. All he says comes true. So now let us go there. Perhaps he can tell us the way to go. Then Saul said to his servant, but if we go, what can we bring the man? For the bread in our sack is gone, and there is no present to bring to the man of God. What do we have? The servant answered Saul again, here I have with me a quarter shekel of silver, and I will give it to the man of God to tell us our way. Formerly in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, he said, come, let us go to the seer, for today's prophet was formerly called a seer. And Saul said to his servant, well said, come, let us go. So they went to the city where the man of God was. As they went up the hill to the city, they met young women coming out to draw water, and said to them, is the seer here? They answered, he is. Behold, he is just ahead of you. Hurry. He has come just now to the city, because the people have a sacrifice today on the high place. As soon as you enter the city, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat till he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who are invited will eat. Now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So they went up to the city. As they were entering the city, they saw Samuel coming out toward them on his way to the high place. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come to me. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord told him, here is the man of whom I spoke to you. He it is who shall restrain my people. Then Saul approached Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, where is the house of the seer? Samuel answered Saul, I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go, and I will tell you all that is on your mind. As for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found. And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house? Saul answered, am I not a Benjaminite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way? Then Samuel took Saul and his young man and brought them into the hall, and gave them a place at the head of those who had been invited, who were about 30 persons. And Samuel said to the cook, bring the portion I gave to you, of which I said to you, put it aside. So the cook took up the leg and what was on it, and set them before Saul. And Samuel said, see, what was kept is set before you. Eat, because it was kept for you until the hour appointed, that you might eat with the guests. So Saul ate with Samuel that day. And when they came down from the high place into the city, a bed was spread for Saul on the roof, and he lay down to sleep. Here we have the first introduction of Saul. And so the story slows down quite a bit. So in the previous text, the previous set of texts, we got this long expanse of time, and then suddenly we stop, and now we're gonna talk about the king. So we get this previous text with Samuel talking about how the people of Israel want a king, and now we're going to get into who this king is supposed to be. So we're introduced to Saul through his father, just like we were introduced to Samuel through his father. We get 5 generations of Saul's background, just like we got 5 generations of Samuel's background through Elkanah. And so we also are told that he's a Benjaminite, right, one of the smallest tribes, but also, as we've talked about previously, it's also one of the tribes that happens to be centrally located, and it also controls the central Benjamin Plateau. And so this tribe has access to a lot of the trade that's going through Israel. All right, and so it's in a very strategic location. All right, and so we get this very little bit of information about Saul's father. His name is Kish, and interestingly, and this is just sort of a trivial thing, but it's kind of interesting the way he is described in the text. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Abel, son of Zahor, son of Bechorath, son of Aphiah, a Benjaminite, a man of wealth. There it is. So it's interesting how he's described. His name is Kish, and he is a man of wealth. But if you take a look at the different texts in the different translations that we have of Scripture, this is translated in a variety of different ways. And again, I only bring this up because it's not really important to our story, but it just shows you sometimes how difficult it is to actually pin down the meaning of a particular word. And so the Net Bible says that his name is Kish, and he's a prominent person. The KJV says he's a mighty man of power. The Tanakh says he's a man of substance. The NIV says he's a man of standing. And the NASB says he's a man of valor. And so this word that we have here for a man of wealth in the ESV, we're not really actually sure what that means, right? And so one of the easiest ways to sort of find out where the translators are struggling is to take a look at the various translations. And when you have all these different words, all right, it means that we're not super certain what those words mean. Okay, and later on we'll have the same word describing some of the men that are that follow Saul afterwards, and there the ESV translates that as men of valor. All right, and so which is probably correct because you're really talking about an army there, and so does that mean? And so when you kind of sort of go backwards in the text, does that mean that this guy Kish is a man of valor? Does that mean he's a sort of soldier-like guy? He's a leader, right? What does that actually mean? And so we're not entirely certain. Again, it's not super important to the story, but it does just show us sometimes how difficult it is to translate the text. Okay, so we do find some other things out as well. Apparently, Saul is quite the looker, right? There's no one else more handsome than Saul in all of Israel. And so people are going to see this guy and they're going to go, hey, that's the guy we want to be in charge, right? Okay, because he looks good, right? He looks like another way to say this is that Saul looked like a king, right? He looked regal, or whatever your description you're going to provide, for what a king should look like. That's what Saul looks like. And this is interesting because this is setting us up for a comparison later on with David, right, and David's kingship. So jumping ahead in the story, when Samuel goes to find David, he goes to Jesse's house and he says, well, bring all your sons out, right? And so, he comes out, they come out one at a time, and God's like, nope, 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 right? And he's like, do you have any more sons? Well, yeah, I got that little runt guy that's over in the field tending to the sheep. Well, bring him over here. And God says, That's the guy, right? And so it sort of sets up this comparison with Saul. Saul looks like a king. David doesn't look like a king. Okay, and so this is something that we keep in mind later on, remembering that the author of this text is the same author, right? So he's got this in mind as he's about to write the rest of this story out. Okay. Again, we get this sense that there's no king in Israel. Everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes, and so. What kind of king do they want? They want a king that's like all of the other kings in the nations. And so what are they getting? Well, as far as they can see, right, as far as Saul looks, he looks like the other kings in the nation, right? Because that's how other nations are going to pick their kings, right? He's going to be the guy who's the mighty man of valor. He's the guy who wins the battles. He's the good-looking guy, the strong guy, the guy in charge, right? And so that's kind of how we get the look that we're getting here is this is how Israel wants to choose their king. All right, so then we get this sort of strange story that comes in, right, of the lost donkeys. Kind of odd because Samuel doesn't just go out and say, okay, well, God doesn't just go and say, all right, Samuel, go over to Kish's house and go find that Saul guy and make him king, right? No, we get this story about some lost donkeys, right? And so Saul goes out with his servant, and he starts wandering around looking for these donkeys. And so he goes up into the area where Samuel is living. It's called Shalisha, right? And so this is going to be northeast of Bethel. And he goes up there looking for the donkeys. Now, we might think this is sort of absurd. I don't know, maybe we don't think this is absurd. But donkeys are representative of wealth, particularly in this age. And so he's got a few donkeys that are missing. And so this represents a lot of money for his father. And so going out and finding these donkeys would be an important thing. Remember, it's donkeys that are going to be doing a lot of the manual labor on the farm. And if you've got a donkey, that's going to make it a lot easier to plow stuff and all that. So him going out and finding them is an important thing. Okay, so he goes out. He's up northeast of Bethel. He doesn't find them. All right, we get some more information about him wandering around, and eventually he comes to Ramah, which is Samuel's hometown. We don't actually get that in the text, but later on it tells us that it's a Samuel's hometown, and we know that that's where Samuel is from. Okay, in the text, it's not. We're not entirely. It seems like Saul is unaware of Samuel or unaware of Samuel's abilities, right? Because it's the servant who brings up that they should go talk to Samuel. Or at least if he is aware of him, it's not something that he actually considered to do, was to go talk to Samuel and find out about the donkeys. Now, I don't know if that's something that you should do, right? Go and talk to Samuel about donkeys, but he didn't seem to consider it, but his servant believes that it can help. And so they decide that they're going to go inquire of this man of God about their donkeys. And Samuel's reputation is that whatever he says comes true, all right? And this is the mark of a true prophet. And we'll get this a little bit later on, too, when he continues to talk to Saul about different things. But the mark of a true prophet, Scripture says in Deuteronomy 18, he says, "And if you say in your heart, how may we know that the Lord has spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him." All right? And so throughout the Scripture, that is sort of the hallmark of who a true prophet is. Those who speak truth, those who say things for God, and they actually come to pass. Okay? And so this is a reputation that Samuel has already, and the servant is aware of this. So then so Saul responds to him. He says, I don't have anything to give to Samuel. And so there seems to be an expectation of giving some kind of gift to Samuel, a sort of honorarium. No doubt that this was abused at times. We see this all the way back with Eli and his children. And so we even see it in other places as well. We see it in other places where it was expected to give an honorarium to people. So if you think of a sort of amusing story is Balaam and the donkey, right? So the foreign kings, the Moabite kings, they're trying to give Balaam all kinds of money so that he'll prophesy in their favor. And Balaam's like, well, I can't take your money because God said I couldn't do this, right? But obviously there was some sort of expectation to support Samuel in this way, okay? All right, and so the servant says, well, they don't have anything except he's got this little bit of silver, and so he says he's got, what did he say, something about a quarter of a shekel or something like that. And so this isn't a piece of silver, so it's not a coin. We're talking during this time frame, it was really a barter system more than anything else. You traded chickens for wheat and stuff like that, and while you did pay for things at times in silver or gold, typically this is a weight of silver. So a shekel is a weight. It's about a gram or something like that. And so archaeologists have unearthed rocks and things that have markings on them that'll say this is a shekel. And so they put the rock in there, and then they put the silver on the other side. And when it balances out, they know that that's a shekel of silver. All right. And so this is so he's got this group of silver here in his hand, all right, and he's going to give this to the prophet. And then we get this little textual note, and this is one of the things that gives us an indicator that this text was not written during Samuel's time, right? Because he gives us this sort of side note that says a seer and a prophet are the same thing. During Samuel's time, he was referred to as a seer, but now we call them prophets. They mean the same thing. Okay. All right, so then, so they've made this plan. They've decided, okay, we're going to go talk to Samuel to find out about our donkeys. So they head up the hill, and most cities are built on hills during this time frame. All right, it was a sort of protection. The army had to go up the hill. There's also usually walls around the city. All right, and so they come up to the city, and the women are drawing water. All right, so they get some information from the women. They find out he's just ahead. And so they head up the hill towards him. And they tell him that he's at a high place. This is interesting because generally speaking, later on in the text, particularly Chronicles and the prophets, the high places are going to almost exclusively refer to pagan sites of worship. These little pagan temples or shrines that are built on the hills, on the high places, okay? Here in the text, though, and even in some places in Chronicles, you'll find that the high place is actually just a place where people go to worship God. One of the reasons, though, later on, that the high places aren't the places that people go to worship God is because the temple has been built at this point, and so people are coming to the temple. All right, and so here the high place is really just a place where people are gathering to worship God. Remember, Shiloh doesn't exist anymore. It's not clear at this moment where the tabernacle is, but Samuel is here at this place, and this is where the high priest is, okay? And so Luther has this to say about the high places at this time. He says, in former times, the ceremonies conducted in some of the high places did not displease God, such as the great altar of Gibeon in 1 Kings, upon which Solomon sacrificed, and the high place where Samuel lived and anointed Saul, because they lived in faith and did all things in faith. And so it had nothing to do with where this place was located. It had to do with the faith that was behind it. Okay? All right, so they go up there. They meet with Samuel. There's some sort of sacrifice that's going on. It's not mentioned exactly what this is. In fact, it's kind of peculiar because this is the only place in the Old Testament where we see somebody blessing a sacrifice. All right. So typically you bring your sacrifice to the temple or to the priest when it was at the tabernacle, and then the sacrifice was made to God. Here we have a sacrifice coming, and it's like we have to have Samuel to show up to say the prayer before the meal. All right. And so that's kind of the impression you're getting here, because they won't eat without him. So, Then we get this backstory. So Samuel so Saul comes in and they see Samuel and they start to head up to the high place, and then we get this little backstory from Samuel. So the day before Saul shows up, God says, "Hey, this dude's coming, right? So expect him." And then God says something interesting to him. So this is a little bit through the verse. This is in verse 16. He says, "Tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be" what? Yeah, prince. Yeah, prince, not king, prince. Okay. Yeah, and so Samuel's judge, God's king, so this guy is going to be a prince, all right? And so he's not actually king, all right, yet. Now, um, we're going to see that happen in the future, but right now, Samuel's direction is to anoint him prince because God is still king. Okay, and so another thing too to point out here, Saul's going to get a lot of grief, and rightfully so, through the next several chapters. But it's important to remember, it's God who picked Saul out. All right, this is God's choice. All right, to be the leader of Israel here. Okay, so Saul didn't come seeking this. All right, Saul is being pulled out of the people of Israel to do this particular task. All right, and so what tasks is he being given here? He actually has been a couple of tasks here. So one of them is to free the people from the hand of the Philistines. All right, so he's been anointed for this particular task. To go and free the people of the Philistines. But he also says something else too, right? He says, "This man is going to be the one who restrains my people." All right? Okay? So what is God looking for Saul to do? What's his appointed task? Why is he anointed? To get rid of the Philistines and to restrain the people of Israel, keep them in check. Okay? All right, and so he's administering the law, all right, okay, through the government, and he's also administering the gospel as well through the removal of the Philistines. And so we see the law and the gospel in his commission here, all right? So his role is to use government, essentially, his position, in order to bring these things about. Okay, so then we get the backstory, and then Samuel invites him to eat, and before he does that, he tells him, "Hey, don't worry about the donkeys." Right? So we get a conclusion to the donkey story, right? So this whole story is what brought Saul to Samuel to be anointed. I also want to point out. This is another one of those interesting things in Scripture that really points to authenticity. This story about donkeys makes no sense. Why include it if you're making things up? You see what I'm saying? Why not just say, Samuel went out and found this awesome, tall, good-looking dude and made him king? No, instead, we get Saul wandering around in the hillside looking for donkeys that have absolutely nothing to do with the story, right? And as you'll read through the rest of Samuel and all the rest of the Bible, these donkeys don't come into play ever again, right? And so these little stories that are just sort of seem asides really do point to the authenticity of the text in the first place, because they make no sense. Why would you even come up with that? Why would you include that? It's just a waste of space, especially when you consider in this time you had a very limited space to even write your text out on. You didn't want to make up a whole bunch of things that didn't add to your story. Okay? All right, so Saul invites them to eat. They find out the donkeys are found, and then we have this sort of odd conversation at the end. And so Samuel says to Saul, "And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on you?" Okay, it's sort of an odd phrasing. This is the ESV text here, but essentially it's a rhetorical question. And Saul is well aware of everybody else's desire for a king. And so what Samuel is telling him here, so the desire of Israel for a king Who is it on? Is it not on you? Right? Okay. Are you not the guy that's being chosen for this job? Okay. And so the desire of Israel is on Saul. And of course, Saul's response is probably what a lot of people would respond. Why have you spoken to me in this way? Am I not, and is not my clan the humblest of all clans of the tribe of Benjamin? So it appears, at least at this point, Saul understands his own humble state. Okay? So there's a lot of things that go into this as well. So we need to sort of jump back in time a little bit and understand who the Benjaminites are. Is everybody familiar with the story of the Benjaminites in the book of Judges? I'm not. If you aren't, that's okay, because it's one we never talk about. The book of Judges is not in the lectionary, and I don't know that I've ever seen a Bible study on this story, ever. All right, so this is going to be Judges 19, I think, to 22, and I'll just sort of give you the condensed version of it, so we don't have to go through it. So there's a story in the book of Judges where there's about a Levite and his concubine. And so the Levite is traveling through the area of Benjamin, and he decides that he's going to stay the night in the city of Gibeah. All right, and so this is Saul's city, and he has brought his concubine with him. When he gets there, there's nobody about, so he decides he's going to stay in the city square. But when he's in the city square, some guy comes by and says, "Hey, why are you guys staying in the city square? Come stay in my house." And he says, "Okay." So they go to his house, and then we get this story that's very reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah. Some of the worthless men of the city come by. They find out that this guy is here, and they bang on the door, and they want to have relations with the guests in the town. All right, and so just like in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the guest is like, "No, this is horrible," and so he offers to throw out the daughters, and then the Levite offers to throw out the concubine, and eventually that's exactly what they do. They toss the concubine out, and so these men have their way with the concubine. And so in the morning, and this is, now remember, Scripture, especially in the book of Judges, is just reporting things the way that they happen. It's not endorsing things. And so this is the text that we get the next morning. So this is Judges 19:27. And her master rose up in the morning rose up in the morning. He was sleeping, right? And so the master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the door of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. So she was dead, right? And so they killed the concubine in the middle of the night. And so the Levite is none too pleased with this, and so he cuts her into pieces, and he sends her to the different tribes of Israel, presumably along with a message as saying essentially that they needed to come, gather together, and take out the Benjaminites because of what they have done. And this is exactly what happens. And so we get this very, very long section of text that describes this war that happens between the tribes of Israel and the Benjaminites. And the Benjaminites hold them off for quite some time, but eventually the rest of Israel overcomes them. And it's not exactly clear how many of the Benjaminites survive. There is one text that says at the battle, 600 men escape, but then later on, it talks about how the army goes in and wipes out a lot of the cities in the Benjaminite territory. And so, but there are some remnants, so there are some people left over, but it's not clear exactly the number. In the midst of all of this, the tribes that gathered together, all right, swore that they would not give their daughters to the Benjaminites in marriage. But after this whole thing is over, they discover that, well, if we don't do something here, the tribe of Benjamin will disappear and we won't have 12 tribes anymore. So the story gets stranger. All right. Okay. And so And so their plan is that they're going to send their army to some of the towns that didn't send forces to help fight off the Benjaminites because they weren't there. They didn't make this pledge of not giving their daughters, right, to the Benjaminites. All right. And so because they haven't done that, well, we'll go over there and we'll attack them, kill them all, get their daughters, and give them to the Benjaminites. All right. And so they go and they attack a town in Gilead, and they capture 400 virgins, and they bring them back to the Benjaminites. But this isn't enough. All right. And so then we get this other strange story about how the daughters of Israel are, they gather together at Shiloh for some sort of festival. And so a lot of the daughters from the different tribes of Israel come together there. And so rather than give their daughters in marriage to the Benjaminites, what they do instead is they say, all right, the daughters are going to gather over here. You Benjaminite men who don't have a wife, you go lay an ambush at this site. And when they show up, you run out and grab them. Right? And then they bring them back. And so that's what happens. All right. So now you understand why we don't do a Bible study on that particular story. This is one of the things with it that is in the background when Saul is talking about why this tribe is one of the least of the tribes in Israel. One of the reasons why they're so small and also not highly regarded is because of this incident. And this incident is probably maybe 150 years old, right? So we're not talking a huge stretch of time in the distant past. We're talking just a few generations removed from the older people that are living during this time frame. Okay, and so it's well on the minds of the people of Israel, and Saul is well aware of it as well. So. Okay, so they come together, they eat, and so we see this interesting meal take place. And what you get here is just this sense that Saul and Samuel are now in full communion with each other, right? Saul has been anointed by Samuel. He's God's choice, and you see Samuel is essentially giving him. He's got his back. He's going to. Gave him this place of honor. He's probably introduced him to all of these different people. And so Samuel is doing everything in his power, his ability to sort of lift Saul up so that people are going to accept him as king. Now, he hasn't been anointed yet. This is about to take place, all right? But he's got this event that just took place that sort of brings everybody together. Okay, so then it ends. After Saul is the honored guest, Samuel brings him to his house and has him sleep on the roof. Now this seems odd to us. You would come on over to my house, you can sleep on the roof, right? But during this age, especially during the summer. In fact, if you've ever been to the Middle East, people still sleep on the roof today because it's cooler up there in the summertime, especially. Yeah, so that was my experience when I was in the Middle East. When I was in Iraq, we stayed in some adobe barracks that had been there, and even in the summertime. So it would be during the daytime. It would be cooler in the building, and by cool I mean it's 90 when it's 120 outside. So relatively speaking, but in the evening, it would get cooler outside, and it would still, and the building would still radiate the heat that it had absorbed during the daytime. Yeah, and so in my experience there in Iraq, there was no cloud cover usually, and so the heat would just rise up off the surface of the earth. And what was really keeping the house warmer was the fact that the adobe had sort of absorbed the heat and was radiating it still. So one time somebody had purchased for me a thermostat or something like that, like not a thermometer, but some sort of thermostat thing. And I had left it on the wall before we went out on patrol. And when I came back, the wall was 140 degrees. So now it wasn't 140 outside, but that's what the wall was. So
Was there a floor in there? Or was
it was concrete floor. So now at this time, probably not. They probably did not have flooring. So not a lot of theological questions that are going on in this chapter. Just a lot of background information, a lot of history here. We'll get a little bit more theological questions when we start looking at Saul and some of his behavior and actions here. But this is really just to sort of build up to what's about to occur. Yeah, and you don't really get Samuel. Samuel seems, at least at the very beginning, very supportive of Saul, and whether that's just Saul, for lack of a better terminology, acting professionally. He doesn't because he doesn't get petty over the fact that God has picked this guy essentially to replace him. All right, and so we don't see Samuel doing that. We see Samuel later on warning Saul about some of his actions and stuff like that, but you never see Samuel get sort of petty and indignant about the fact that Saul is the guy that God chose to rule instead of allowing Samuel to continue to judge. So yeah.